Welcome to Triday's RoundTable 44, Transcending Good versus Evil, Stepping Beyond Judgment into Sovereignty and Revelation. I am Adam Finnegan and will assist in moderating today. These roundtables were inspired by the two-volume book series The Valediction by husband and wife co-authors Paul Fitzgerald and Elizabeth Gould, who have developed a plan for world peace and can be found at valediction.net. Just click on World Peace in the top banner. In this roundtable, we explore how to transcend the false dichotomy of good versus evil and release the grip of judgment, the force that fuels revenge and retribution in human consciousness. By becoming aware of our own judgments and consciously ending them, we open the door to sovereignty, the supreme authority over ourselves that lays the foundation for true equality and peace worldwide. Join us on this journey from judgment to sovereignty as we prepare for the JFK Revelation at the Dallas Convention on November 20th, 2025, with host Chris Milligan, delivering a sermon on awakening inner authority and stepping into a higher consciousness of revelation. As we follow the thread into the future that's already unfolding, you will hear a couple presenters, and then we want everybody to participate with questions and comments. And I want to remind everyone to just be mindful of time and allowing for others to speak. Be respectful to all walks of life and join us in making peace the foundation for life on this planet. But before that, I'd like to introduce our host and his introductory remarks. So here's our host, publisher Chris Milligan.
Golly Wally, Adam, thank you very kindly. We've been doing these now for uh, almost 4 years, okay? And it's just been a one revelation after another, the things that Paul has been able to do some deep dives in and figure. I mean, this started off, Paul called me up about a book, and it's about the Fitzgerald and the John Fitzgerald Kennedy. And I would always, walk into these conferences and say, well, I see the ducks being put in a row before he was even elected. And people would say, oh yeah, right, right, right. And we pulled it, uh, way back to the 13th century and shown some other things. And then, I've been talking a lot about secret societies, and it's we've been here in the United States, as a matter of fact, all over the world, been subjected to years of psychological warfare, okay, to divide us, okay, into good and evil and all of this. When I started looking at this, I came to realize that, quote unquote, the powers that be hang out around a lot on the fringes, okay, because by controlling the extremes, you control the middle. So they put a bunch of lies out there so that they can get all this people fighting back and forth to each other. But, one thing that I've been doing here has been using the words of John F. Kennedy, because he was a good speechwriter and he had some good people working with him. And, the eye of providence doesn't really choose sides, it just shines. Okay. Now, these are some remarks in Nashville at the 90th anniversary at Vanderbilt University. This state, this city, this campus have stood long for both human rights and human enlightenment, and let that forever be true. This nation is now engaged in a continuing debate about the rights of a portion of its citizens. That will go on, and those rights will expand until the standard first forged by the nation's founders has been reached, and all Americans enjoy equal opportunity and liberty under the law. But this nation was not founded solely on the principle of citizens' rights. Equally important, though too often not discussed, is the citizens' responsibilities. For our privileges can be no greater than our obligations. The protection of our rights can endure no longer than the performance of our responsibilities. Each can be neglected only at the peril of the other. I speak to you today, therefore, not of your rights as Americans, but of your responsibilities. There are many in number and different in nature. They do not rest with equal weight upon the shoulders of all. Equality of opportunity does not mean equality of responsibility. All Americans must be responsible uh, citizens, but some must be more responsible than others by virtue of their public or their private position, their role in the family or community, their prospects for the future or the legacy from the past. Increased responsibilities go with increased abilities, for of those whom much is given, much is required. You have responsibilities, in short, to use your talents for the benefit of the society which helped develop those talents. You must decide, as Goethe put it, whether you will be an anvil or a hammer, whether you will give to the world in which you were reared and educated the broadest possible benefits of that education. Of the many special obligations incumbent upon the educated citizen, I would cite three as outstanding: your obligation to the pursuit of learning, your obligation to serve the public, your obligation to uphold the law. But the educated citizen knows how much more there is to know. He knows that knowledge is power, more so today than ever before. He knows that only an educated and informed people will be a free people, that the ignorance of one voter in a democracy impairs the security of all, and that we can, as Jefferson put it, enlighten the people generally. Tyranny and the oppressions of mind and body will vanish like evil spirits at the dawn of day. And therefore, the educated citizen has a special obligation to encourage the pursuit of learning, to promote exploration of the unknown, to preserve the freedom of inquiry, to support the advancement of research, and to assist at every level of government the improvement of education for all Americans, from grade school to graduate school. Secondly, the educated citizen has an obligation to serve the public. He must be a precinct worker or president. He may give his talents at the courthouse, the state house, the White House. He may be a civil servant or a senator, a candidate or a campaign worker, a winner or a loser. But he must be a participant and not a spectator. At the Olympic Games, Aristotle wrote, "It is not the finest and strongest men who are crowned, but they who enter the lists, for out of these the prize men are elected. So too in life of the honorable and the good, it is they who act rightly win the prizes." I urge all of you today, especially those who are students, to act, to enter the list of public service and rightly win or lose the prize. For we only have one form of aristocracy in this country, as Jefferson wrote long ago in rejecting John Adams' suggestion of an artificial aristocracy of wealth and birth. It is, he wrote, the natural aristocracy of character and talent. And the best form of government, he added, was that which selected these men for positions of responsibility. Third, and finally, the educated citizen has the obligation to uphold the law. This is the obligation of every citizen in a free and peaceful society. But the educated citizen has a special responsibility by the virtue of his greater understanding. For whether he has ever studied history or current events, ethics or civics, the rule of a profession or the tools of a trade, he knows that only a respect for the law makes it possible for free men to dwell together in peace and progress. He knows that law is the adhesive force in the cement of society, creating order out of chaos and coherence in the place of anarchy. He knows that for one man to defy a law or court order he does not like is to invite others to defy those which they do not like, leading to the breakdown of all justice and all order. He knows, too, that every fellow man is entitled to be regarded with decency and treated with dignity. Any educated citizen who seeks to subvert the law, to suppress freedom, or to subject other human beings to acts that are less than human degrades his heritage, ignores his learning, and betrays his obligation. Certain other societies may respect the rule of force. We respect the rule of law. The nation, indeed, the whole world has watched recent events in the United States with alarm and dismay. No one can deny the complexity of the problems involved in assuring to all of our citizens their full rights as Americans. But no one can gainsay the fact that the determination to secure these rights is the highest tradition of American freedom. Now, to get to the sermon part of all of this, um, you know, uh, here's something from Luke. I have come to bring fire on the earth, and how I wish it were already kindled. But I have a baptism to undergo, and what constraint I am under is completed. Do you think I come to bring peace on earth? No, I tell you, but division. From now on, there will be 5 in one family divided against each other, 3 against 2, 2 against 3. They will be divided, father against son, and son against father, mother against daughter, and daughter against mother, mother-in-law against daughter-in-law, and daughter-in-law against mother-in-law. Another thing from Luke. Behold, a certain lawyer stood up and tested him, saying, Teacher, what shall I do to inherit eternal life? Jesus said to him, What is it written in the law? How do you read it? Well, the man said, You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength, and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself. Jesus said to him, You have answered correctly. Do this and you will live. But he, desiring to justify himself, asked Jesus, Who is my neighbor? Jesus replied with a story. A certain man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho, and he fell among robbers, who both stripped him and beat him, and departed, leaving him half dead. By chance, a certain priest was going down that way. When he saw him, he passed by on the other side. In the same way, a Levite also, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a certain Samaritan, as he traveled, came where he was. When he saw him, he was moved with compassion, came to him and bound up his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. He set him on his own animal and brought him to an inn and took care of him. On the next day, when he departed, he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the host and said to him, Take care of him. Whatever you spend beyond that, I will repay you when I return. Now, which of these 3 do you seem to be a neighbor to him who fell among the robbers? The man said, He who showed mercy on him. Then Jesus said to him, Go and do likewise. Amen. And, onwards to a better future. It's my understanding that Liz was going to say some things.
Yeah, I'm actually going to take over from Chris. Thank you so much for giving us such a great setup to what we will be delivering, which is in preparation for our revelation on November 20th. The first thing I want to introduce you to is our working title. It is Queen Elizabeth's master astronomer, astrologer, and spy, John Dee, was the wizard behind the JFK assassination. When Lyndon Johnson, Allen Dulles, J. Edgar Hoover, Nelson Rockefeller, George W. Bush, Edward Lansdowne, James Jesus Angleton, Jack Valenti, and everyone else connected to setting up JFK's rendezvous with death on November 22nd, 1963, were following John Dee's plan, inaugurated on November 22nd, 1583, with the beheading of JFK's blood relative, the last Earl of Desmond, Gerald Fitzgerald. And how that came to be is what Paul will be summarizing for you today as we build our case for the presentation next November. Take it away, Paul.
Thank you, Liz. Thank you, everybody, for coming today. This is a summary of some of the work we've been doing. There's a lot of detail that I struggle to get in that just doesn't belong in it. So we're going to give you the general idea. And we're going to be revisiting some of the last roundtables, which will be the source material for our presentation in Dallas in November. So the last time I addressed the conference in 2023, I spoke of the background surrounding John Fitzgerald Kennedy's Fitzgerald family and how it might have played a role in making him a target of assassination. I'd felt compelled to dive into the historical record, not expecting to find ancient secrets waiting to be revealed. But as the years passed and the research deepened, I came to recognize a common thread that transformed the story from a family history into an esoteric motive for the JFK assassination. Could JFK have been sacrificed in a ritual killing to satisfy the requirements of a cosmic cycle stretching far back into the pre-Christian past that had almost nothing to do with his politics as president? And had he been marked from the beginning as that required sacrifice to an apocalyptic end-time belief system practiced by Queen Elizabeth I's court astrologer, alchemist, and conjurer, Dr. John Dee? An end-time belief system that requires the rebuilding of King Solomon's temple through the externalization of the hierarchy and continues to play out under the protection of American foreign policy. In other words, no Sam Giancana, no Fidel Castro, and no Marilyn Monroe, just Queen Elizabeth I and her secret agent 007 John Dee, the man who had been called upon in January of 1559 to cast a horoscope for Elizabeth's coronation, even after the date had been chosen, in order to prevent any assassination attempts by Catholics, or in one historian's account, any occult calamity from occurring. Author and John Dee researcher Jason Louv writes, quote, "Why was the casting of horoscopes, or calculating as they called it, seen as so contentious or even dangerous? Astrology, like sorcery, is about defining the narrative of reality. Considering astrology even from a purely propaganda angle, the power to guide reality in any other way than that sanctioned by the state is a precarious business, especially when prophecies often have a way of becoming self-fulfilling. Magicians, astrologers, and prophets can often appear to have changed objective reality. All that is truly changed is the subjective way in which events are being perceived, a skillful manipulation of confirmation bias." To add authenticity to this view, the impetus to begin this deep dive into JFK's ancestral connection came in 1992, when my 10-year-old daughter, Alyssa, that morning awoke from a dream visitation of my deceased father, accompanied by a man dressed in a tam o' shanter cap and bell-bottom tartan plaid uniform, who told her he was 800 years old. Not being one to ignore a message from the grave, I began to consciously search for what on earth this might mean. When Chris first asked for a third book to our valediction memoir series after delivering that Dallas speech in 2023, I knew I would have a lot of explaining to do. Our first two books were about the trials and tribulations we'd lived through, unraveling the mysteries surrounding the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. How could a little country in the middle of Central Asia that the State Department had recently lowered to a fourth rate of importance suddenly become the greatest threat to peace since World War II? And all of this under the watchful eye of the Carter administration's most anti-Soviet hawk, Zbigniew Brzezinski. Was this a security lapse on par with Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor, or had somebody pulled a rabbit out of the hat? And why did the U.S., theoretically a modern nation, respond to the invasion by invoking a holy war against the Soviet Union that spawned links to the Crusades, the Knights Templar, and for us, the Fitzgerald family's invasion of Ireland in 1170? A third book would require a lot of explanation about motivation and reflection, not to mention an historical context to connect the past with the present, as well as to JFK and my connection to it. Over the decades, we've learned how the JFK story of November 22nd, 1963 is much bigger in more profound ways than can be imagined. But getting people to accept a broader picture has been a problem. And that's what I want your help with today. When we started out to research the background of the Fitzgerald family back in the early 1990s, we were still writing screenplays. We'd had a lot of practical experience working with the mainstream media at CBS, ABC, CNN, and PBS, so we were well aware of what we were up against. Network news reporting was always deceptively biased within a very narrow range of assumptions and unseen rules to maintain an underlying narrative. But our daughter's dream with my father and the 800-year-old man forced us to look at the event in very different ways. Her dream could be said to combine our practical work on Afghanistan with what looked to be an Irish or Anglo-Irish personality of unknown origin who certainly didn't fit any narrative I could think of, except the Fitzgerald's arrival in Ireland in 1170. It did make it for an interesting storyline, though, and when a black and white photo of the guy showed up in a book I'd bought about Britain's first war in Afghanistan in 1840, it was downright mind-blowing. So we thought about it and called it The Voice, as in the voice of an ancestor from the past, and started writing. At the time, I had acquired a U.S. Senate Select Committee report on narcotics, which spoke of the Afghan Mujahideen's mystical communications network, through which one could send secret, long-distance telepathic messages, a technique which John Dee was known to have possessed. And if anything, Alyssa's dream was a very mystical personal message. I'd also read about the East India Company's Alexander Burns and his mystical 19th century attempt to establish the origins of Scottish Rite Freemasonry in Afghanistan. But there was nothing for me that would just justify such a communication. We'd had no intention of linking my personal story to JFK, but piece by piece, connections began to emerge. I knew my grandfather and JFK's grandfather, John Francis Fitzgerald, were related, but he'd never made a big deal about it. They'd met in Boston in 1920 and talked it over, but that's what it was like for the Irish growing up in Puritan Boston. Up until JFK, most of the Irish who came here believed the past was better left forgotten. But Alyssa's dream told me there had to be something very important that needed to be remembered. 800 years was the only clue we had to go on. My father's oldest sister, Mary, carried the family history and told me when I was young that the family had come to Ireland 800 years before with Richard de Clare, the Earl of Pembroke, nicknamed Strongbow. She said they'd been able to hold on to their land in a little village called Abbeyfield because they'd had a piece of paper somewhere that had an English king's signature on it. And that was just about it. My grandfather had left the farm in 1900 to come to the U.S. and left his brother in charge, but he did own the 500 acres on which the farm sat, which meant a lineage to the origin had to be traceable. A breakthrough came when our librarian found an 1888 copy of Strongbow's Conquest of Ireland. Strongbow's Conquest was a compilation of stories written in the 12th century from both Irish and Norman sources, including a Fitzgerald named Gerald de Barry, who featured his grandparents, the Welsh princess Nest and her husband Gerald, the constable of Windsor Castle, under both the Norman conqueror William I and his son Rufus. Strongbow's father and uncles, the de Clares, were powerful brokers in the Anglo-Norman Norman-French establishment and operated an industrial center on the border of Wales that was the most populous city in 12th century Britain next to London. Numerous Fitzgeralds had married into Strongbow's family, and their success in Ireland as the leaders of his armed force angered Henry II as they quickly ran up victory after victory. Reading it for the first time was like reading Lord of the Rings, with dreams, visions, phantom armies, prophecies, and miracles filling the pages. But Strongbow's Conquest wasn't fiction. It was Norman Irish history. And when I turned to the Appendix 2 and viewed the names of the invaders, it became personal. There in black and white was a list of the most prominent persons engaged in the conquest of Ireland under Henry II, and the first 7 of them could have been pallbearers at my father's funeral, including my father's name, William Fitzgerald, and my great-grandmother's maiden name, Barry. Much in Strongbow's Conquest regarded the personalities of the Fitzgerald family and their fulfillment of Merlin's prophecies. Prophecies were important to 12th century ecclesiastical authors who saw them as a way to mold the narrative to justify the invasion as God's will. Gerald de Barry himself promised a full book of such prophecies and applied one to the murder of Thomas Becket in 1170. Becket's death, which coincided with the Fitzgerald's invasion of Ireland under Strongbow, was seen as Henry's fault and angered the Pope, causing Henry to fear that the Fitzgeralds and the de Clares would establish a rival Irish kingdom with papal approval, which is something the Fitzgeralds eventually did try to do. His death featured signs of pagan ritual that echoed the death of the overt pagan King William Rufus 70 years before. It was also revealed that as Henry's Archbishop of Canterbury, Becket could act as a ritual stand-in based on astronomical cycles in which Saxon kings had been sacrificed to pagan gods under the signs of the zodiac as required of their role as king. The possibility of a cosmic connection to Becket's death as a result of numerical cycles governing ceremonial dates on the calendar struck a chord. Though nominally Christian, early Norman kings of England seeking to prove their legitimacy followed a pagan custom, and a careful analysis of both deaths reveals a wealth of clues to support the thesis, which further lent itself to the creation of a successful screenplay. Much is involved in the process of converting a mental image to the screen, both linguistic and numerical. And if you don't get the math right, it doesn't work. Author Anthony Burgess talked about the importance of number in the updated 1986 introduction to his novel, A Clockwork Orange. Quote, "Whatever its symbology, the number 21 was the number I started out with," Burgess writes. Novelists of my stamp are interested in what is called arithmology, meaning that number has to mean something in human terms when they handle it. The number of chapters is never entirely arbitrary. Those 21 chapters were important to me, but they were not important to my New York publisher. The book he brought out had only 20 chapters. He insisted on cutting out the 21st. Now, when Stanley Kubrick made his film, though he made it in England, he followed the American version. So what happens in that 21st chapter? Briefly, my young, thuggish protagonist grows up. He grows bored with violence and recognizes that human energy is better spent on creation than destruction. But my New York publisher believed that my 21st chapter was a sellout. The Americans, he said, were tougher than the British and could face up to reality. Soon they would be facing up to it in Vietnam. My book was Kennedian and accepted the notion of moral progress. What was really wanted was a Nixonian book with no shred of optimism in it. Learning of Burgess's concern for number and his connecting it to Kennedy led me back to the Renaissance Neoplatonist Dr. John Dee, Queen Elizabeth's spy and political astrologer, and a new perspective on the Kennedy era opened before my eyes. In a 1994 analysis, the CIA even compared Elizabethan intelligence to, quote, a Cold War practice, an occult Cold War in which Dee's systematic research intelligence led to assassinations and covert political action, and that John Dee had developed the means and methods by which those actions could be effectively coordinated to benefit policy. And so not only did we have JFK's presidency mirrored in the Elizabethan Cold War, we had the main feature of that Cold War, an ongoing confrontation with his own Fitzgerald family, conducted through sorcery and magic. Learning of Burgess's concern for number and his connecting it to Kennedy led me back to Renaissance Neoplatonist Dr. John Dee, Queen Elizabeth's spy and political astrologer, and a new perspective on the Kennedy era opened before my eyes. In 1994 analysis, the CIA even compared Elizabethan intelligence to a Cold War practice, an occult Cold War in which Dee's systematic research intelligence led by assassinations and covert political action that John Dee had developed the means and methods by which those actions could effectively be coordinated to benefit policy. And so, not only did we have JFK's presidency mirrored in the Elizabethan Cold War, we had the main feature of that Cold War, an ongoing confrontation with his own Fitzgerald family conducted through sorcery and magic. During Dee's era, mathematics was considered a form of magic and mathematicians considered sorcerers. In his 1570 mathematic preface to Euclid, The Elements of Geometry, Dee argued the importance of mathematics rested on numbers and the intermediary role they played between natural and supernatural levels of the cosmos, and that as intermediaries, numbers participated in everything from the divine to the mundane. It's now accepted that Dee was hundreds of years ahead of his time and that his application of an esoteric mathematical imperialism called cosmopolitics to forecast the time and place where political events would occur in the future, would anticipate modern global positioning as well as pre-crime technology by 400 years. According to author Francis Yates, Renaissance Neoplatonists believed that all knowledge, including mathematics, descended from the Creator through the angels and the intellectual world to the stars and the celestial world, and then to the elements, and then to all things in the terrestrial world, and that the remains of such things as ancient cities and the pyramids were evidence of past use of mathematical magic. But not until I focused on my own family's history in Ireland did I begin to link JFK's assassination to these practices and discover how I'd stumbled on a Fitzgerald family narrative that collided head-on with the magical narrative created by Elizabeth's court astrologer. John Dee's goal was to create an environment through which a sacred empire could be created in which all faiths would be drawn together in harmony and succeed where others had failed in bringing about the second coming. But why did his use of Solomonic magic and mathematical calendar reform cause him to believe he had achieved the means by which to do it? When I ended our first roundtable on this subject, I emphasized that if one thing alone could be said to tie the element of John Dee's 16th century cosmopolitics together with today's geopolitical events from its ancient metaphysical beginnings in the sacred Platonic hierarchy of Greece and Rome, to the Knights Templar, to the foundation of Masonry, and the establishment of the divine right of kings. It is the rebuilding of Solomon's temple as a model of the past and an objective for the future. The temple represents the single most important feature guiding current history, and not simply as a metaphor for perfection, but as an actual mathematical construct invoked to bring about the biblical end of days without anyone being the wiser. As described in the book City of Revelation by John Mitchell, the notion of the temple as the place of union between cosmic and terrestrial forces has been held by all people. To the Babylonians, their house of God, and to the Greeks, the rock of Delphi, represented the creation center. To the Jews, however, has fallen the honorable charge of preserving their living tradition into the present time, so that the image of the Temple of Jerusalem restored has become accepted in the language of symbolism throughout a great part of the world as representing the eternal aspiration of the mystics to witness the return of the prophetic spirit and the consequent appearance of a revealed world order necessary for the reestablishment of a human civilization. It was this dream that inspired the early Christian Gnostics, the Hermetic Societies, the Knights Templar, and the Order of St. John, the medieval Kabbalists, and the magicians. The first aim of the Freemasons was the restoration of the temple, the key to the secrets of the lost primeval harmony, the ancient dream of the divine order translated to earth, and the foundation myth of colonial America. So in our opinion, if you possess the ability to create a mathematical model to guide humanity from the fall of man in the Garden of Eden back to a mythical golden age, which Donald Trump has promised to do in his inaugural address, then it would all begin in the mind of God with the sacred measurements of the Temple of King Solomon. And if that were the case, how then would you go about achieving something as grand and complex? Early on in our combined adventures in Afghanistan and family research, we'd hit upon certain names and numbers that kept turning up without any connection to what we were looking for. One such number was 117. And if you search around, you'll find that a lot of people over the years have shared the same experience we had. I inadvertently came upon the number on 3 separate occasions, just as I started to write this paragraph. According to BibleStudy.org, one possible meaning of the number 117 is from its prophetic link to Jesus in the layout of Scripture. The Song of Solomon, penned by King Solomon himself, contains 117 verses, and the first 3 books of the Bible have 117 chapters. But the original case that caught our attention was the Kabul hotel room, number 117, in which the kidnapped American ambassador Adolph Dubs was assassinated on Valentine's Day, February 14, 1979. Dubs had been sent to Afghanistan by Carter's Secretary of State Cyrus Vance with an express mission to calm the Soviet fears of American interference on their southern border and keep the Soviets from invading. Yet his unsolved murder only made that invasion inevitable. Already aware of the ritual elements surrounding the November 22nd JFK assassination and its Masonic association with the Knights Templar as a day of revenge, we focused on the number 117 as a possible signal of some kind. But not until I found the following passage on creating cipher codes did it become clear what that signal might have been. It reads, quote, "When constructing a code that is designed to be deciphered without a decoder guide, a cryptographer will use extremes as pointers to show us the structure of the code. Tools such as longest, shortest, and repetition serve to draw attention. In keeping with this theater, we notice that the shortest chapter in the Bible, Psalm 117, is also placed at the exact center. It contains exactly 33 words, which by no coincidence is the number of the years in Christ's life, the number of generations from Adam to David, and the number of degrees in Freemasonry. On counting sets of 33 chapters from the beginning of the Bible, we find that the 9th set lands on 1 Kings 6, 9 sets of 33 chapters backwards from Psalm 117. We find that the 9th set lands on 1 Kings 7. The chapters 1 Kings 6 and 1 Kings 7 detail the construction of Solomon's temple. The temple is begun in 1 Kings 6 and construction ends in 1 Kings 7. Due to the fact that the word temple is often associated with perfected man, in wisdom a great deal of coding can be found within the biblical concept of Solomon. The word Solomon serves a dual purpose in the coding of the Bible. The word Sol is Latin for son, the word Om is Hindi for son, and the word On is Egyptian for son. Also, the vowel O is symmetrically placed throughout the word 3 times. So here in the number 117 is a coded message hidden in plain sight as a mathematical metaphor for Solomon's temple, and probably a key to Solomonic angel magic. And here is that same number providing the geolocation for an American ambassador to be removed by assassination as the final obstacle to a desired geopolitical outcome, the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. Was that complete coincidence, or was it intentional subterfuge? I use the term geolocation because that is exactly what Dr. John Dee was doing back in the 16th century when he used Solomonic theurgic magic as an astral global positioning system to cast long-range horoscopes for Britain's imperial agenda and prophesy exactly how Queen Elizabeth could avoid Catholic assassins known to be summoning spirits and casting horoscopes against her. The U.S. ambassador had been sent to Kabul as a man of peace, specifically to calm Soviet fears over the intentions of Jimmy Carter's national security advisor, Zbigniew Brzezinski. He had complained to the Secretary of State of Brzezinski's covert interference, and his assassination in room 117 ensured that Brzezinski's aggressive anti-Soviet agenda would prevail by restoring the Cold War and undermining any chances for peace with America's arch enemy. He did not anticipate President Carter's covert support for Brzezinski's agenda and that he would become the sacrifice enabling the secret plan to achieve its goal. The Soviet invasion 10 months later resulted in a major shift in the U.S.-Soviet relationship away from détente and arms control that moved the hands of the doomsday clock the closest to midnight since being established in 1947. In addition to killing diplomatic relations, it opened a Pandora's box of hostile strategic objectives that had been waiting in the wings, and especially one that fulfilled the long-standing British imperial agenda by occupying the Middle East with American troops. Did the powers that be use the number 117 as a go code to their initiates, revealing a deeply held secret operation? Was the number being used to program American minds to a coming apocalypse without their knowing? Or was the choice of room 117 the externalization of a pre-existing code that had been running underneath our reality, lying in wait until conditions were met and that only people with special knowledge would recognize when the message was delivered? I use the word externalized intentionally to draw attention to a 1957 Lucis Trust publication by theosophist author Alice Bailey called The Externalization of the Hierarchy, in which she describes the hidden forces controlling world events and the timeline in which those forces would become visible. Originally published under the Trust's initial name, the Lucifer Publishing Company, the book reveals the final step in the externalization in 2025 would accompany the rebuilding of the temple and the return of the Messiah, while initiating the rule of the Masonic movement as the custodian of the law, the home of the mysteries, and the seat of initiation under the all-seeing eye. Though seldom discussed in public, achieving the apocalypse and the reconstruction of the temple as an organizing principle for a revealed New World Order has been the unspoken ambition of Western esoteric thought since the destruction of the Second Temple in 70 AD. But was this New World Order, based on the Roman imperial rules of sacred hierarchy, really the fulfillment of the Jewish Messiah and the revealed truth? Or was the Christianity of the Apostle Paul just a rebranding of a Roman imperial hierarchy and its pantheon of gods, rather than that of a Jewish Messiah bent on freeing his people from the oppression of just such an elite hierarchy? As noted by author Frances Yates in her book Astrea, the imperial theme in the 16th century, the pagan Roman Empire became enshrined in the foundation of church mythology from its inception and came to play a key role in establishing the Roman Church as the foundation for sacred empire. She writes, "The sanctification of the idea of the empire was enhanced by the tradition of the providential role of Rome as a historical preparation for the birth of Christ. The age of Augustus was the supreme example of a world united and at peace under the Roman Empire, and to that age had also belonged the supreme honor of witnessing the birth of Christ. In consenting to be born into a world ruled by Roman law under the grace of the Caesars, Christ had consecrated the Roman world order and Roman justice. Virgil's Aeneid, with its glorification of Augustus, thus became a semi-sacred poem, glorified the historical framework of the Savior's birth. Virgil was believed to have spoken with the inspired voice of a prophet when he proclaimed in the fourth eclogue that the golden age was about to return." In the 20th century alone, well-known mystics Helena Blavatsky, William Butler Yeats, and the Golden Dawn, Franklin Roosevelt's Vice President Henry Wallace, Russian artist Nicholas Roerich, and the magician Aleister Crowley all put forward similar plans in one form or another to bring the old corrupted world to an end, bring forth a return of the Golden Age, and invoke the New World Order described by Alice Bailey and the Lucifer Trust. But what of the message preached by the flesh and blood Jewish Messiah and the revealed truth his apostles were willing to die for as they spread his message throughout the empire? According to author and researcher Jason Louv, that message came with a fundamental problem revealed in the Apocalypse of St. John and remains today as a terrifying shadow haunting the New Testament and the descendants of Rome's imperial legacy. Louv writes in his book, John D. and the Empire of Angels, quote, "Revelation originally described the end of the world as it was then known. It was written from the perspective of the Jews who had accepted Christ as the Jewish Messiah, not St. Paul's converts to the new religion of Christianity, drawn from the pagans of Greece, Rome, and northern Africa. The book is a visionary prophecy of the final war of the much tormented Jewish followers of Christ against the evil of not only Nero's Rome, but also Paul's non-Jewish converts to Christianity." For us, this distinction between the original Jewish followers of Jesus and St. Paul's pagan converts to Christianity, stripped of its connection to Judaism, was important but had never attracted our attention. But when we ran the idea up against the arrival of the Fitzgerald family to Ireland in 1170, a year we have been told was chosen to commemorate the anniversary of the destruction of the Second Temple, and how they'd so quickly embraced Irish ways and culture, we realized they must have found something in Celtic Christianity that set them on a different course from Rome and prepared them for the Christ-like sacrifice that they were to endure. As described in his book, Celtic Christianity, A Sacred Tradition, A Vision of Hope, and Benedictine monk Timothy Joyce writes, quote, "The Catholic Church developed in its own unique way, absorbing most of its pagan antecedent. The relation to Rome and the larger universal church emerges as an issue, especially for those who see the Celtic Church as something distinct from the Church of Rome. On the continent, many Celts had embraced much of Roman culture without much resistance after Roman imperialism had spread its way northward. But most significantly, the planned Roman invasion of Ireland never took place. The Irish were never part of the Roman Empire as far as the Roman Church was concerned. The Celtic Church developed on its own distinct way. Some of the theological problems that beset Rome never impinged on the Celtic Church. St. Augustine, for example, had come from the sect of Manichaeans. This group held a dualistic view of reality, believing in a cosmic split of light and darkness. Material beings included the human body, and sexuality took on an aura of evil, which never entered the Celtic Christian Church. This early church was influenced significantly by the Eastern Christian churches of Asia Minor that had retained a strong connection to its Jewish roots. Through trade, there were even direct contacts with the East. Knowledge of the churches of both Jerusalem and Constantinople was widespread. The reorganization of the Roman Empire into a Roman imperial church after the conversion of Emperor Constantine in 312 CE overwhelmed much of what had originally been a prophesied Jewish end of days movement on the verge of its apocalypse or revelation. Factional struggles dominated the early Christian church as the Jewish Messiah was transformed by the Apostle Paul and subsequent church fathers from a human king into a divinity of the imperial Roman Church with a mission of universal conquest. The crowning in Rome of the Frankish King Charlemagne as Holy Roman Emperor in the year 800 completed the connection. But the conflict with the original purpose of the Jewish Messiah as a liberator of his people and not a deity remained a problem not only for the Roman Church, but the Fitzgerald family as well. As Frances writes in her original 1947 paper, Astrea, underlying Elizabeth's role as the Virgin Queen, quote, "The doctrine of the divine right of kings arose out of the medieval controversies concerning the respective powers of popes and emperors. Theoretically, both the pope and the emperor depended upon Christ, and the two together working in harmony were to combine all that was of lasting value in the system of the Roman Empire with all that was essential to the realization of St. Augustine's city of God. But the dual system proved unworkable. The papacy gradually encroached upon the empire, weakening the imperial power by encouraging individual sovereigns and putting forward its claim of a universal monarchy under which the unity of the world was alone possible. The imperialists developed a counterclaim, maintaining that the emperor had a divine right to the universal monarchy by which the peace and union of all mankind would be achieved. And so with these words, we understood how the Fitzgeralds had come to be one with the people of Ireland, and how the original message of the Jewish Messiah, quote, whose mission was to liberate his people from oppression of foreign rule, matched the mission of the Fitzgerald Earls of Desmond as they grew in direct opposition to the hierarchy of the crown in London. It would seem that over their 400 years in Ireland, the Fitzgeralds took on the role of the martyrs for the Irish people, once played out by Jesus for his people, as they confronted the sacred imperialism of the Neoplatonist acolytes of the Virgin Queen Elizabeth. They came straight up against the same opposition to Roman sacred hierarchy as Jesus of Nazareth and got the same results. It is of no small importance that the beheading of Gerald Fitzgerald, the last Earl of Desmond, marked the beginning of the British Empire in what would become the Pax Britannica. What the crucifixion of the Jewish Messiah in AD 33 had done ritualistically for Rome, Gerald's sacrifice on November 22nd, 1583, did for London, and JFK's did for the American Empire on November 22nd, 1963. The eternal struggle of good against evil, the ancient Manichaean war of light against dark, infused into Christianity by St. Augustine and St. Paul the Apostle, required a victory over the darkness, and spilling of Fitzgerald blood filled that sacred role. So, now that I'm exhausted, now that you've heard the summary, I'd like to ask what you think of these revelations and what might be added to our message should you feel there might be something missing. Thank you.
Wow. Let me, I'm sorry for the intrusion, people, and I'm sorry that I didn't know how to get rid of it fast enough, but that was fascinating. Paul.
Thank you, Chris. As I said, there are a lot of points that, I want to put into the presentation, but this was just kind of
This is a summary.
this is
yeah.
as an idea of where the beginning and the end in the middle is. So if there's something that needs to be explained, I'd be more than happy to describe it.
So, well, tongue-tied. Bruce.
Yeah. Did you say Ruth? Yes.
Oh,
I
right.
just,
When we said,
It's okay.
All right.
Bruce can go.
Yeah.
After you, Ruth.
Well, I just want to say that what you're putting forward is transformational. It's incredibly taking all these threads to reveal a pathway of intention and intention is what creates reality. Reality is very much affected by the power, the godlike power in human beings to create reality. And there have been masters of intention. And I feel like you are unraveling a thread of intention that seems to have come from some very dark place in the Roman Empire. But I want to say, for me, what you just put forward, I would have to listen to 20 times. There's so much density and so much history and so many ideas that are actually revealing. It's like a mosaic of mirrors that are all reflecting back on each other to get to this point of revelation. And so I just want to say that, and also to honor the intellectual knitwork of what you've knitted together to reveal what you have revealed. And I have a sense of it. And I've studied this stuff and I've looked at this stuff. But what you're saying is the thing that I want to say is I don't get a sense of the purpose or the intention behind, at the very beginning, this world order. Why and who was it? I don't get a sense of what is the instigation point. And I feel like that's necessary for me to maybe be able to hold it all together.
Well, I would have to say that I really think this divine right is what is being sought after. Okay, that the world is all wrong because it doesn't work is the assumption behind it, and the fact is that there are minds that want to control that message because they think they have a better answer. So it really, I think it's yes, Liz.
Yeah. Well, I have one of the parts of our roundtable was to bring in the idea of sovereignty, that what really has to follow your own internal revelation of recognizing how dangerous judgment really is to your ability to engage other human beings in a completely open and accessible way is completely hindered by judgment. And when you actually remove judgment, you open up to sovereignty, which is the only way that we are going to be able to acquire the quality which I think is totally represented by all messiahs. I mean, my idea now is that what a messiah is exactly the way the Jewish messiah is described. This is an individual within a community who basically stands up for the people against the imperialists. And what is imperialism? Imperialism is the use of force. Period. That's what it is. And we have we are now exhausted in its inability to stop using force. We don't know how to communicate to this engine. It's like an engine that got turned on. So what we're coming up with is an idea that we feel can begin to disengage in ourselves something that has to be disengaged before we can be effective at looking at the ones whose engine can't be turned off and basically help them shut down.
I just want to say something that I was thinking as you were talking, is that it's interesting to me that so many of these structures are outer directed. They are about a power that's external. And what and a control from outside towards what the dominion of what is inside. And that is the exact structure that fractures each individual's capacity to connect with their divine, their sovereign divine being.
Right. Well, that, yeah.
Because in order that the one thing we have to do is return to our center, and the center's everywhere. And so all of these structures that you're talking about are like bombs to that, the capacity for a human being to really arrive at that sovereignty.
Yes, I did want to point out, I think Bruce actually, I believe, has to leave soon. So I did want to give you a chance to get in before.
Thank you. It's a real quick question. Paul and Liz, will you be publishing the piece that you just read?
Well, I think this is the foundation work for the book, the third book, that
Well,
the valediction.
Yeah, right. But it's, yeah, I think we will start with that as a total presentation piece, which, yes, we'll do it in stages like that.
You know, a big aspect of this whole process is the fact that John Dee became kind of the GOAT for the occult aspects of what was going on in terms of psychological warfare, in terms of manipulating the minds of people and in the advancement of the empire and the idea of empire. And so, you know, the fact is that he's been kind of the boogeyman. And that's what's beginning to happen now is that that idea, that blockade is beginning to break down. And academics are beginning to accept the fact that, you know, with quantum mechanics and with all kinds of, you know, interconnections that we are now seeing are available, you know, looking at the pyramids and saying, wait a minute, the pyramids are something different than what we've been told they are. Things like that. That there is actually something there. And so people are investigating it with a new kind of honesty. So we're really at we're on the verge of either complete shutdown or we're on the verge of a new renaissance in that sense, which we certainly are in need of. That's for sure.
Thank you.
Need to shut down in order for the Renaissance to happen.
Maybe.
We have.
Okay, and now, so that was all you had to say, Bruce, and we can go to Richard Spence now. Did you have?
Oh, okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Well, there's a lot to take in, so I'm going to try to address every sort of point in it. Here's a thing that not long after Paul started talking sort of popped into my head. And it's a saying I heard somewhere. I don't know where. I didn't make it up, but somebody else did. And it goes basically like this. When a witch wishes something to happen, she or he always talks about it as if it has already happened.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of what you're sort of talking about in terms of Dee and a role as a sorcerer, and you know, a witch on steroids, was able to manipulate numerically or otherwise, but this is what all this comes down to. It comes down to the question is that can time be manipulated? Can things in the future be calculated and planned? Can a kind of mechanism be built? Think of it this way. The idea that what Dee was building wasn't a physical, but a metaphysical clock that was designed to go off or to cause certain things to happen at particular times. Now, that's a lot to believe that can be done, because we tend to think of time as being a very solid thing. But it's like the old saying that the witch always talks about things that she wishes to happen as if they have already happened. That idea is very much embedded in occult belief. Here's another example of where I think the same thing is being said. One of the most important things that Aleister Crowley said, and I think a key to understanding what his whole concept of magic is about, is that magic is the art and science of causing change to occur in conformity with will.
Yeah.
That an intention is made, and then that intention, through the application of will, which I think is something more than just holding your hands and wishing really, really hard, but can bring that about. And the more people you can get involved in that, consciously or unconsciously, can bring that about.
Right.
Now, to add yet another element to this, right now, as we exist, there's a guy alive by the name of Nick Land. I don't know whether anybody has heard of him. He's British. And back in the 1990s, he and some of his friends were part of a thing at Warwick University in England called the Cyber or Cybernetic Culture Research Unit. And here's what basically came out of this. Their belief, or their creation of the concept of a thing they call hyperstition. And you can go out on YouTube and you can find Nick Land talking about hyperstition. So what's a hyperstition? A hyperstition, simply put, is something that you imagine, and then by imagining it and by constantly talking and writing about it, by repeating it over and over again, by embedding it in the collective consciousness, you make it real. And they basically thought they could do this with anything. At one point, they decided to take a story written by William Burroughs, the guy that wrote Naked Lunch, beat author. And they just, knowing that Burroughs wrote this as a piece of fiction, they were simply going to use that story called The Ghost Lemurs of Madagascar as the basis of their whole belief system. So this is an idea that's out there, that the future can be manipulated, and even not the idea that from the past you can manipulate the future, but even more intriguing, that from the future or the present you can manipulate the past. That you can, from the present, change the past to bring about the future that you want to be. So I'll just throw that out there. The other thing I'd mention, and it comes back to John Dee. You said he tends to be sort of turns into the devil in all of this. When it comes to Dee, I think it's important to keep in mind that he is an employee. He is a servant, of the Queen, but he is more directly a servant or employee of her spy chief, Sir Francis Walsingham, and who sets him on motion. He is Dee's controller. Dee is a tool. But then the other guy to look at, who I kept expecting to come up and he didn't, I don't think, was Edward Kelly. And Edward Kelly was the medium, the psychic that Walsingham eventually teams up with Dee.
Right.
Because what Dee wanted to do was to speak to the angels. But, they're kind of difficult to contact, and he needed someone, he needed a channeler, we'd now call them, in order to contact the angels. And Walsingham basically provided him with this guy. He's also a crook in a variety of ways. I mean, Kelly is a dubious figure. He's not an honest person. He'd already been convicted at least once for forgery or fraud. So he comes in and he channels the angels. Now, there are a lot of questions here. They always say they're angels, but, basically you're just taking their word for it. But he started getting answers out of all of this. So what's actually going on here? Is Kelly actually speaking to some sort of other world, other intelligences, angels or not? Or is he just a con man? And did Walsingham know he was a con man? And he is using him to control and manipulate Dee. And here's an example of how well Edward Kelly could manipulate John Dee. At one point, Kelly comes to Dee, who had married a younger woman, and says, the angels tell me they want us to switch wives. They think I should sleep with your wife and you should sleep with mine. Now, Dee's wife, by the way, hated Kelly and absolutely wanted nothing to do this, but he was so convinced by this guy that he actually talks his wife into sleeping with a man she hated, and who furthermore got her pregnant in the process. So that, it means it's a suggestion of the kind of mental sway that Kelly exercises over D, that he could talk him into that. So this is where you always, when you're looking at D, you're looking at Walsingham, you're looking at Kelly, the question to be asked is who is really in control, and it's not D. And with that, I'll shut up.
I would like to just make one quick comment about a modern day version, I think, that kind of meets what you're saying, would be Zbigniew Brzezinski. That man could get anything he wanted out of anyone. When he was inside the White House, he was running Carter 100%. Absolutely. It was a total takeover. Just what you just described about what Kelly was to be.
And he fooled everyone. I mean, we sat down in Chuck Hogan's living room, the guy that ran the operation in Afghanistan for 5 years, and he said, when my cameraman turned the camera on, he said, "Can I tell you something?" He had to get it off his chest. He'd been running around apologizing for Brzezinski for that Nouvelle Observateur article that was written where Brzezinski claimed that he'd tricked the Soviets into invading Afghanistan. And he said, "I never met Brzezinski all those years." He said, "And I finally met him, and I told him," he said, "I don't believe that thing that you supposedly said." And Brzezinski said, "I did say it because I meant it." You didn't know what you were doing over in Langley and what we were doing at the White House. The whole objective was to get them in there and hold them there, create their own Vietnam. So, the fact is that he had everybody right down to the bitter end, including Noam Chomsky as an example.
Yeah.
Noam didn't believe it either. So, we got it from the horse's mouth.
Yeah.
So, yeah, you're right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Hello. Okay, Robert, do you have something to say? Let's keep it succinct.
Yes. Hello, this is Jill.
Hello, this is my friend Jill. She
Yeah,
has a question.
I just have a question. Thank you again for such a great thing. I just wondered, what is your view of I just want to make sure I understand. Do you have a view of the building of the third temple? Do you feel it's something positive, or what is your view of that?
Yeah, well, I'd say our working position on that right now, and of course these are, working issues. We're in stages of development, but I would have to say we look at it metaphorically. I think the ones who view this as literally rebuilding the temple, I think, are way off base in understanding the nature of what the purpose of the metaphor was all along. That this is a representation of mankind, and that's our point about the messiahs represented throughout the ages. The Christs always represented those individuals who rose to some standard that so affected the local people that the mythologies were created around them. So they became these points historically that have been, going on and on. But very few people have the opportunity to make a connection to the myth and the man. Well, that's what we were able to do with the Fitzgerald history. That the myth about the Fitzgeralds is embodied in Gerordi Arla, who was supposedly a creation of the goddess Anya and Maurice, who was the second Earl of Desmond, I believe, and that the story around him that was left was that he was going to basically come back at the end of time to save the Irish people. Well, it turns out that actual man, Gerald Fitzgerald, it was based on, was born in 1338. And the whole history about his creation, and it's one and the same. So you really get a sense of the reality of the creation of these kinds of myths coming from an actual human being who embodied exactly these points we're making, which is what the Fitzgeralds rose to in Ireland, defending the rights of the people against, obviously London's imperial encroachments. And that idea is what we are trying to bring forth, that we're now at the point where we've got to recognize them in their human form. And I think that's what we're saying about JFK, that he literally came as president who made it very clear he was trying to bring peace to the world. He left a massive amount of documentation of his purpose, and yet still trying to deal with the realities of being the actual president at the time. But the proof is in, I think, the fact that we're still talking about him now, and we're still talking about his peace speech, which still is a phenomenal inspiration for the world.
Yep. And
I'd like to say something about stargazing, if you don't mind.
no, I'm talking now. I had my hand up here. The temple, there are some people that would like us to go forward. There's some people that would like us to go back. Okay, the people that like us to go back want to create a temple and killing a cow and all of that. But actually, the third temple has been built in the lands of the West here, and it's been built on ley lines. And it's quite obvious that the Masonic networks have been doing this for a long time. And again, secret societies, again, they are a thing about, they're a thing. They're like a gun, okay? It's what a person does with them, okay? And so the temple that we're looking to, the third temple is being built right here in the air, you might say, along the ley lines in the West. Any comments?
We are.
I think our house sits on a ley line.
Well, thank you for that. Thank you.
You bet.
There are ley lines that apparently there's a place on Battle Road in Lexington and Concord where you go to that leads directly. They've gone back and they've restored it to its original place, but there's a thing called Bloody Bluff, and the Bloody Bluff was the point where the local colonists stopped and decided they were going to ambush the British when they were on their way back from the bridge in Concord. And it is part of a mountain range that comes up in Brussels somewhere. So it's here in Concord, and so we have all of these things communicating across the world. These lines that are filled with quartz and whatnot. So it's quite possible that it's all. As I said, I think we live on top of one right here in our house. We've got all kinds of channels running through here, but that's just my opinion.
Well, as we showed with Jason Berry from New Orleans, who has shown all these different lines. I mean, we have the street where JFK was killed was exactly at 33 degrees, and it's as the externalization of the hierarchy showed, people have in place, for 25 for this year, again, are we going to go forward? Are we going to go backwards? I mean, that's basically the question.
Yeah.
Okay.
I actually have a question for Rick Spence. When you brought up the idea of going backwards in time to change things, okay, I actually thought a lot about that. And what I believe is it isn't so much that you change things as much as you change your perception of what happened, and you draw different ideas from the reality as you become more nuanced and more sophisticated in being able to translate things. But the actual idea of changing the past, of let's say somebody who shouldn't have been born, isn't born. I mean, I find that, I don't know, I just don't, it doesn't quite seem to fit into this, in this idea, okay, of how consciousness works, because this is all about consciousness and how we can literally frame any reality we want, and we can be next to someone who sees an entirely different world than you do. And in fact, I imagine that there are many entities, we're living around that have an entirely different perception of the reality that they're living in relation to us. So that's the only reason I find it hard to see it as a literal
Well, the fact,
correction.
remember, I think it was Roger Penrose, and that said that there was a problem with the timing of consciousness. He said that, they have studied enough to know that when you actually intend something, that the intention has already been pre-programmed.
Yeah.
So that all your autonomic functions, they can measure that now. Your autonomic functions are already gearing up for you reaching across the table before you consciously decide to reach across the table. So, or do anything for that matter. So, as he said, there's a problem with that, and
we're closing it though, aren't we?
We're trying to close those two things together. We're out of sync with that.
Right,
It's a
yeah.
synchronicity.
Right.
And I think that it was something also that Michael Crichton once said that comes to mind, which you said reminded me of. When he said that, I always liked Crichton because his books were so real that they were so credible. You actually believed that they could happen or were happening. And he said he'd convinced himself at one point, and maybe it was, that something he had written was based on some real event that he had uncovered. And he said that he was questioned about it once, and he went back and he tried to find the source, and he couldn't find it. And he couldn't find any reference to the source of the event that he had based this thing on. And he was convinced that it was real. At least he'd convinced himself that it was real. So once again, perhaps it was in some way, but the fact is that he was really troubled by it because it troubled him for the rest of his life. He could never nail it down. So anyway, the nature of the timing of consciousness, figuring out the matrix and of the Bible code is an example. There's also evidence that the people that have put out the Bible code indicate that everything that was ever said or written, everyone who's ever lived has got a statement in there. If you could find it. So the fact is that if the matrix is already there, then we're simply tapping into it. And that's the experience that you have with the screenplays. We had a friend of ours who went out and he did his whole screenplay thing and he worked his way up into the business. And he said at one point, he said, there's a funny thing that really happens. He said, you think you've got an idea that's original, that is real. He said, and you start developing it and you get out there and all of a sudden you discover there's 3 other people that are doing the same thing and you never came in contact with them at all. So he said, it's almost as if there is some kind of pool of understanding and a place where you go to get these ideas and nourished by the idea. And then, if you can get it to market before the other guy, you win. But the fact is that there is another state of reality out there that people are, becoming when you do the writing and you get deeply into it, you discover there is a reality to it. Maybe not substantial or physical, but real.
Okay, so who's
I don't know. You want me to say something? Time is funny. So, can you actually manipulate time? I don't know. Okay, show me somebody who really does. But the idea keeps getting thrown out there.
Right.
And the other thing, what you were saying reminds me of is the idea that reality, everything that we perceive as being real is in some, and I think this is the case, is tied to consciousness. It's something we all commonly perceive.
Right.
And which the argument is it's real because we all, in a sense, agree to some degree that it's real.
Right.
So if reality is an artifact of consciousness, I'm not saying it is, I'm just saying and you can change consciousness, you thereby, remember Crowley's idea, causing things to conform to will. Change your will, change your consciousness, and that can, well, I don't know how it works to change your reality if it doesn't change anybody else's, but this is all out of my pay grade. So there's some kind of connection between the two. And I suspect that if it is possible to alter time, then somebody has done it and someone is doing it. There you go.
I would just say, I think it is the perception process that I think is malleable.
That you hit on, yeah.
I think that's the point, that for instance, time is very fast when you're having a good time. No, it's very slow when you're having a bad time. So there's no question that's perception. And the way things feel, that when it feels hot versus cold, there's so many factors that are not just the technical issue of whether you feel it or don't feel it the same way someone else does. And the other point I would make is that we talk together and think we're on the same ground until something happens. And then we discover we're not necessarily seeing the same thing when we really have to act on it. So there's a lot of wiggle room, I'd say, in our use of consciousness with each other that can create many different positives and negatives that I think are affected by our perceptions.
Wendell has his hand up.
I wanted to make sure that Robert Morningstar got to speak.
Sure.
Thank you. I wanted to say something about stargazing because of all of this screeing and scrying that John D. was doing. When I found out that the John F. Kennedy assassination was a religious pageant overlaying the assassination of Osiris with the assassination of Hiram Abiff, I became intrigued with the body of knowledge that put that pageant together.
Mm.
And Richard Reeves in The Ends of Power said that JFK said to Dave Powers on the morning as they arrived in Dallas, he said, "Last night would have been the perfect night to assassinate a president of the United States." And of course, that mention of night instantly led me to astronomy and astrology. So I looked up the stars that night. And on the night that Clint Murchison had his night in Egypt party that he invited JFK to, but he refused to go to, there was a conjunction of Mars and Venus in the constellation Scorpio. So I began studying the skies over these famous events. And then I discovered that Osiris was murdered at a time when Mars was conjunct in Scorpio with Antares. Antares is an evil star. And Antares is also known as Belial. So it's a sign of the devil.
Stars aren't evil.
Yeah, will you stop, please?
No,
I didn't say stars were evil.
you just did.
I said that people say that stars were evil. So just hold your seat, will you, Chris? The point is, I said to myself, who had the knowledge to put all of these things together? That Osiris was killed on the time when Mars was conjunct with Antares in Scorpio, and that there was a conjunction of Venus and Mars in Scorpio over Dealey Plaza that day. And I came across Clint Murchison, is the man who had the party the night before that JFK refused to go to. But in studying the history of astronomy, I found the name of the astronomer royal in the 1800s was R.A. Murchison. So I think that there's this family affair, and as Paul pointed out, this has been an ongoing, long-term War of the Roses time of contention, dynastic rivalries. So I wanted to put that out there. Somebody knew that November 22nd was going to be the day when Mars and Venus were in Scorpio, and so did JFK. Why else would he say last night would have been the perfect night to assassinate the president of the United States? Okay.
Right.
So that's it for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert.
There's nothing out there that says JFK refused to go to Murchison's party. Okay, Ruth?
He didn't go.
Yeah, I know he didn't go, and there's nothing that said that he was ever invited to go. Okay. Again,
What I read was JFK said, "I don't think it would be good for the president of the United States to be seen in the company of mega rich oil barons."
it's
Okay. So
there,
you haven't read everything, Chris. Okay. And you have your biases too.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
So let's
yeah.
just put it away.
Well, no, because there's no record of that at all. Okay, go ahead, Ruth.
Okay, I just wanted to talk to time because time is a construct that exists in our mind. And actually, all there is the present moment and the cycles that we go through over and over, an infinite number of cycles of going through things again and again. But what does exist is the consciousness or the memory of, or a thought form about what we believe happened in the past or what we project into the future. And what that does is it creates a construct in our mind that is actually affecting our consciousness and our what it is that we are projecting, what it is that we are intentioning. And our intention is always creating reality, whether it's conscious or unconscious. And many of us have been swept into a vortex of other people's programming of us to create the reality we are experiencing as we are perceiving it. And what you're saying, Liz, about is perception, because when you go back, as you have, to unwind stories that have been part of the narrative, and you begin to see it with reflections that begin to reveal its manipulation, and you clean it out, you pull the threads, and you begin to see the underlying intention. Once you're able to do that, you're able to then go inside of yourself and clear that out of what is encrusting your capacity to intention, and maybe intention from freedom in the present moment, instead of from all of these dark manipulations that have been encrusting our power and our sovereignty, which is also affecting what we create in the future. So we change the present by going back to the past to understand. Understand, because there's no power in the past and there's no power in the future, only in the present moment as we activate our sovereignty with heaven and earth.
Right.
That's it. So I just wanted to say that.
So I think
any last words, Paul and Liz?
Well, thank you. No, I think the chore, the job, I think is quite clear, Chris. And,
yes, I can. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to just test it out and get people's opinion about, what we're saying. And, this whole business about return of the golden age is really, you see these phrases that are repeated over and over again over the last few hundred years about what the goal is. And we really do get the impression that we are at that goal, just like the externalization of the hierarchy, 2025.
Yeah. Well, I would just like to add, I think the word hierarchy itself is the problem, and that's what has to go. Hierarchical thinking, I actually think, is what we have been living through. That is the basis of our problem, because as we reach a level of maturity and realize that something is not allowing us to feel mature, something is suppressing us. And I remember feeling that sense when I was 40 years old, in things that were going on in my life, and recognizing, wait a minute, why is it that I don't feel as if I'm, and the idea of self-anointing is when that came to me. I said, well, if no one is going to recognize that in me, I'm going to have to recognize it in myself. And I think that that's part of what we're all throwing off, is this hierarchical effect that is manifest at the most unbelievable level, obviously in the people who have gravitated to running the world, because they're all using the power to do what? Control. It's all about control, and that's what hierarchy, I think, produces. So that would be my advice.
Okay. Well, I'd like to, end it again here with some words from JFK. And this comes from his address before the Canadian Parliament in Ottawa, his first address to a foreign government as president. It was May 17th, 1961. And there's some words that you might have heard before. For in the end, we live on one planet, and we are part of one human family. And whatever the struggles that confront us, we must lose no chance to move forward towards a world of law and a world of disarmament. At the conference table and in the minds of men, the free world's cause is strengthened because it is just, but it is strengthened even more by the dedicated efforts of free men and free nations. As the great parliamentarian Edmund Burke said, the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. And that, in essence, is why I am here today. This trip is more than a consultation, more than a goodwill visit. It is an act of faith. Faith in your country, in your leaders. Faith in the capacity of two great neighbors to meet their common problems. And faith in the cause of freedom, in which we are so intimately associated. Onwards to a better future for our children.